Plan on flying? In order to board domestic flights, your driver's license or state-issued ID must be a real ID. Learn how to get your real ID today at tsa.gov/realid or visit your local DMV.
Hey, welcome back to Autumn's Oddities. I'm Autumn. I took a glorious break over the weekend, celebrated my birthday and Valentine's Day. I got to be an adult, have some drinks, have somebody else make food, sit down in a restaurant. It was wonderful. It should hold me over until our, next date when we go to New Orleans in April. And we are staying in the very apartment that Marie Laveau lived in. Yes, for real. And also, I will record an episode there. I'm going to pay tribute to her. I don't even want to risk fucking with the ghost of the Voodoo Queen. Also, apologies if you hear loud banging sounds, gospel music, or just guys screaming their fucking conversation because they literally seem to have only one volume and it's screaming at the top of their lungs. We've got a crew of like 3 people in the basement, 2 floors down. They're being loud as shit. I hope my microphone is good enough to drown them out. Anyway, today I'm covering the case of Gail Katz-Bierenbaum, and it's especially sad because it really feels like the whole thing could have been avoided. There were not just red flags. There were red fucking tarps covering the whole of the Upper East Side of New York. Well, let's get into the case. And just a trigger warning here, there are incidents of domestic violence and animal abuse. I'll warn you when we get there. And hopefully, if you don't want to hear them, you'll be able to skip ahead and not hear any of that because they're pretty graphic. So Gail Katz-Bierenbaum was last seen at the Upper East Side Manhattan apartment she shared with her husband, Dr. Robert Bob Bierenbaum, at 11 a.m. on July 7th, 1985. Robert claimed that he and Gail argued that morning, and Gail walked out of their residence on East 85th Street to go sunbathe in Central Park. Robert later claimed that he waited for Gail at the apartment until 5:30 p.m., then went to a family birthday party in New Jersey. He didn't appear concerned at the party, but while at a friend's house that evening, he acted upset and called his apartment a few times looking for Gail. Gail has never been heard from again. The last time anyone besides her husband saw her was on July 6, 1985. That day, she saw her gynecologist and a hairdresser and spent some time with a few of her friends in the afternoon. So a couple of people saw her. Investigators believe that Robert was involved in Gail's disappearance for many years and was responsible for her presumed death, but didn't have, enough evidence to make an arrest in the case, which happens all too frequently. So who was Gail Katz? Gail Beth Katz was the first child born on March 8, 1956 in Brooklyn, New York, to a family that would eventually have 3 children. Her sister, Elaine, was a year behind her in school, and they were best friends. She described their childhood as idyllic and carefree. When Gail was in 4th grade, the family moved to Long Island, and with their new close proximity to the city, they began to take advantage of the culture that the city had to offer. They saw Broadway plays, and they took in the sights of the city together. Gail loved the stage and dreamed of being a dancer. And her sister Elaine described her as sensitive, loving, and creative. She also described Gail as gorgeous in a damsel in distress way. I'm not really sure what that means. I don't know. Maybe she thought she always was like kind of a victim. I don't know. That's sister talk. She's allowed to say that about her sister. Nobody else is. Gail's best friend from high school, Denise, described her as smart and soft-spoken, but somehow she still had a powerful presence. Denise also said that while Gail was beautiful and smart, she seemed to have a sense of depression about her. Like she just always had an air of depression, melancholy, whatever, for seemingly no reason. She never seemed to know how great she was, and she never thought she was good enough, which you'll see someone takes advantage of that insecurity later. After high school, Gail attended State University in Albany. And while she was there, she began dating a guy in a rock band and got really into the rock and roll girlfriend lifestyle. By all accounts, she was head over heels and very happy. Gail designed costumes for the band and moved to Manhattan to pursue a degree in dance at NYU. She was also trying to help her boyfriend get a record deal by pushing his band to any patrons that she came across while bartending. Gail was living that city life and hustling. When the relationship ended, as many do, everything seemed to go downhill. Gail suffered an arm injury and dropped out of school, and she seemed to be drifting without a purpose. She really seemed to have lost interest in the things that she loved, mainly because she had focused all of her energy on the guy in the relationship. I'm guilty of doing it a time or two. I'm sure most people are. If you haven't, good for you. You're a very secure person. Trigger warning here for self harm. One night in 1979, Elaine got a call from the local hospital telling her that Gail had attempted suicide. I'm not sure how, but that doesn't really matter. It was an attempt. Elaine believed it was a cry for help and not an actual suicide attempt, and she tried to be there for her sister as much as possible. But Elaine said that she didn't really believe Gail ever recovered from that trauma. Gail seemed resilient, though, and after she recovered, she landed a job with an advertising company. She made fast friends with a coworker and told her that she was ready to get back out there. Sadly, that's when the friend told her that she just had to meet Dr. Robert, excuse me, I almost called him Bob Bierenbaum. I don't care. I feel like calling him Bobbert. He's such a piece of shit. I would like his name to be made fun of. Robert Bierenbaum grew up in the affluent suburb of West Orange, New Jersey. His father was a doctor, and Robert Bob himself was brilliant. He excelled in high school and got his pilot's license then as well. And I'll refer to him as Bob from here on out. It'll just make things easier. Bob pursued a career in medicine, like his father, and he graduated from Albany Medical College and was a surgical resident when he was introduced to Gail. They were about the same age when introduced, and Bob had an impressive resume. He spoke several languages. He was a surgeon, a classical guitar player, a pilot, an expert skier, a gourmet chef, and he'd even mastered instructor level piloting. So he was a real good pilot, apparently. Plus, he was Jewish, which was important for a potential husband for Gail. He seemed like the perfect man. Gail described him as handsome, but I think he looks like a troll, and I'm only commenting on his appearance because he's an utter piece of shit. Bob wooed Gail with extravagant dates and even took her for a flight on one of their first dates around the Manhattan skyline. That would be a pretty impressive date, I agree. But there was an extremely dangerous side to the perfect man that Gail just couldn't seem to see, or, maybe he was still hiding it from her. Gail was enamored and loved that they could just get on his plane and go on vacation on a whim. She also enjoyed the wealthy doctor lifestyle that Bob seemed to be living. Bob loved to be in control, so his ability to control what they did and where they went was more than ideal. But pretty early on, the red flags started to appear. When they went out as a couple, Bob was extremely controlling of Gail, like to the point it made everyone around them very uncomfortable, and they all had a story to tell about it. He would ask Gail where she was going and when she was coming back, even if it was just to go to the bathroom. Yeah, this is a slippery slope here. On one double date, Elaine went on with the couple, and Elaine is her sister, remember. Bob made Gail sit on his lap while he shoved food into her mouth. Everyone found it very off-putting, like it's not really PDA, it just seems like a control issue. And then Bob really stepped up his weird by feeding Elaine, much to her discomfort. If my sister's boyfriend, husband, love interest did that shit, I would smack his hand away from me because that is crossing a line. I'm not saying they would ever do that because they're not married to creeps, but you know what I'm saying. Like, this is a hypothetical. Bob was described as awkward and off-putting by pretty much everyone that came into contact with him, personally and professionally. That's a very recurring theme here. So yes, being controlling is a big red flag, and trying to feed your girlfriend's sister is fucking strange. And his behavior didn't improve. In fact, it got much, much worse. Trigger warning here for animal abuse. One night in 1982, Elaine got a hysterical call from Gail saying that she needed to be picked up from the city immediately, and she didn't elaborate as to why. Gail was in tears when she got into her sister's car while holding her cat, and then she told her sister what prompted the call. Bob tried to kill Gail's cat, like actually attempted to kill it. He had apparently become jealous of the attention the cat got. Bob choked the cat in the toilet with its head submerged underwater. So it sounded like he was simultaneously trying to drown and strangle it. Bob explained that he did this because he believed Gail loved the cat more than him. That's when you leave. Like, if you were wondering at what point you leave someone, it's right fucking there, because you know things can only get worse from there. Like, if he feels that way about the attention you give to a cat, what if you had a baby with this man? What would he do then? As it turned out, this wasn't the first cat that Bob had tried to kill. He apparently told Gail that he accidentally strangled a prior girlfriend's cat to death. Bob said it was an accident, that he strangled and killed a cat because it got loose in the car. I don't not understanding this logic at all. Yeah, I think we all know what the signs of psychopathy are, and this is definitely one of them. Harming animals, killing animals. He's probably done this many, many times, and he freely admitted it, so he doesn't even seem to be ashamed of it. Like I said, there are many, many red flags here. Elaine urged her sister to leave Bob, but Gail was sure that he was marriage material in spite of the fact that he attempted to murder her cat out of jealousy. Her parents were thrilled with them dating, and maybe she felt some pressure to marry the handsome Jewish doctor. On August 29th, 1982, they were married in a lavish Manhattan ceremony. Gail believed that her love could cure whatever was troubling Bob, and that's how she reconciled the attempted cat murder. The couple spent their honeymoon on the island of Crete, and things seemed to be off to a great start from the outside looking in. When they returned to New York, they carried on with their upper middle class lifestyle. They took ski trips and vacations to the Caribbean and hung out with other doctors and their wives. They seemed like they were living the high life. In January of 1983, they moved into a two-bedroom apartment at 185 East 85th Street. I know that's a mouthful there, which is actually the building shown in the title sequence of the show, The Jeffersons. So, they're moving on up to the east side. I don't want to sing it. I'm sure it's copyrighted. But Bob was still a resident doctor and Gail was a student. So it seemed unlikely that the young couple could afford all of this. Well, they weren't affording all of that because Bob's parents were apparently footing the bill for the rent. Must be nice. Bob was in his residency at Maimonides Medical Center and worked very long hours, as residents do. He eventually wanted to open a plastic surgery practice, but he didn't look like a successful doctor, and many people described him as sloppy. His coworkers also described him as socially awkward and very bad with patients, meaning that he had no bedside manner, like patients seemed to hate him. Again, these are recurring themes. Bob is a weird, sloppy bitch. So Gail was trying to finish her bachelor's degree at Hunter College at the same time. She seems to have, switched around a little bit, doesn't seem to know what she wants. So money was tight in spite of the fact that it looked like they were pretty well off. She decided to get a personal assistant job to help out financially, and Gail began working for Francesca Beale, a high-powered attorney at CBS TV. Francesca described Gail as beautiful and hardworking, and she said she really enjoyed working with her. She was very professional. On the outside, it really did seem that Gail and Bob had it all. Both were successful in their own rights. They were going on lavish vacations and living on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. I mean, sounds like they're doing all right. But their marriage was incredibly tense, mainly because of Bob's controlling nature. He wanted to control every aspect of Gail's life, and frequently, Gail would go to a neighbor's apartment to study because Bob was screaming at her. She told neighbors that he was verbally abusive and that she didn't feel comfortable in their house. Bob told her that she was worthless and useless, which, if you've ever been in an abusive relationship, you'll recognize this kind of behavior. I'm not passing judgment. I've been in them, so I'm saying that I recognize them. Even more abusive behavior. Gail had to live by a certain set of rules created by Bob. Again, if you've been in that kind of relationship, you'll recognize this. Like, she had to dress a certain way and be home at a certain time and do things exactly the way Bob wanted them done, or there'd be hell to pay. And yeah, I've been in that situation where I literally walk on eggshells. Nothing I do is good enough. The person just comes in looking for a reason to pick a fight with you and to tell you, that you're a worthless piece of shit until you finally realize that you're not and you get out if you're lucky. Gail said things were so bad that if she went to turn on a light, Bob would reach over, grab her hand to stop her, and turn the light on himself with his other hand. This is not a euphemism. He actually did this. There was nothing too small for Bob to control. On her 30th birthday, Bob insisted that Gail sit on his lap through the entire dinner at a restaurant with her friends and family present. Awkward. At some point, Gail was even cutting up and feeding Bob his food. Her friends asked her if she wanted to sit in her own seat, and she seemed intimidated and said sitting on his lap was fine. Everyone got the feeling that she didn't want to cross Bob and that she was genuinely afraid of pissing him off. By the end of the year, Gail began to complain to other people about Bob's abusive behavior. She said Bob was never home, and when he was wildly controlling, and that their marriage was not a happy one. They were constantly arguing and fighting so loudly that neighbors could hear, and the neighbors said that it was very frequent. On November 9th, 1983, things really came to a head. Circling back to Bob's rules, he apparently hated smoking, and Gail was forbidden from it. Gail was studying for the GRE, it's a graduate school exam, and decided to take a break because she was anxious. Gail thought that Bob had left for work, and she stepped outside. She was standing on their balcony smoking a cigarette, and she saw Bob see her. He legit leapt over the patio furniture and began strangling Gail so intensely that she became unconscious. He then slapped Gail repeatedly to revive her and proceeded to apologize. Gail went into the 19th precinct of the NYPD and reported this assault and possibly even murder attempt, but fucking absolutely nothing happened. Nothing at all. But this time, Gail didn't brush off the fact that Bob had attempted to kill her or her cat. She told him that he was a sick motherfucker and he needed help. Those were actually her words. Her sister said that is what she told him. Bob went to psychiatrist Dr. Michael Stone, and yeah, he saw every single red flag. Bob apparently did not even try to hide them. Dr. Stone said that Bob was unhinged. He said that the more trivial a triggering factor for a violent incident, like strangling someone for smoking a cigarette, the more dangerous the person. That makes sense. Dr. Stone realized that Gail was not safe and wrote a letter to her to document his findings in the event that something happened to her. He warned her in the letter about the danger of continuing her marriage with Bob and continuing to live with him out of what he felt was his duty, and the fact that he just did not want to be held liable if anything happened to Gail. I'm going to read you the letter. It's not that long, but I think you need to hear it to just kind of get an idea of who Bob was. The letter reads, I have been advised by Dr. Stone that for reasons of my own safety, I should at this time live apart from my husband, Dr. Robert Bierenbaum, until such time as it would appear that the risk of injury to my person has been significantly reduced. I further understand that, owing to the unpredictable nature of my husband's physical assaults and to the chronic nature of the characterological abnormalities that underlie these assaults, no firm date can as yet be fixed as to when it might be safe to resume living together. If I do not heed this advice, I must accept the consequences, including the possibility of personal injury or death at the hands of my husband, and absolve Dr. Stone of responsibility for any such eventuality. To summarize, this letter says, bitch run, your husband is going to kill you. Dr. Stone was genuinely convinced that Gail would die, or at the very least, be injured by her husband, and he said that he has never in his long career written a letter like that to anyone else, like to a patient or a person that they spoke about. Dr. Stone even met with Gail to discuss the letter and urged her to leave immediately. But he said he had a sinking feeling that something bad was going to happen because she did not seem to be heeding his warnings. Gail, of course, kept the letter as evidence, and she apparently was going to use it as leverage in divorce proceedings, which is very smart. She told her sister about it almost a year after she got it. So she didn't tell anyone about this letter for an entire year. No one could understand why she would stay with this man when his doctor is warning her that he is going to kill her. Gail was working on her PhD in psychology at the time and believed that she knew better than a practicing psychiatrist. She told her sister that she understood psychology and that she really wasn't in danger. Okay. But the couple was only on their third year of marriage. They had stopped being intimate altogether. And at night, Gail slept in her clothes in case she needed to flee. It sounded like they were separated without being legally separated from accounts that her friends and family gave. And to that end, Gail began dating other people because she was lonely. Gail and Robert had been married since 1982 and obviously had a stormy relationship for a long time. She apparently at some point left him for a period of time in the fall of 1983. For whatever reason, they reconciled. And Gail had an affair with an investment banker during the summer of 1984 and again in the spring of 1985. And by the time of her disappearance, she'd become romantically involved with a coworker. It's unclear whether Bob knew about any of these relationships or not, and if it was motive for anything he did later. On July 6th, Gail went for a walk with her friend Denise, and she had a copy of the real estate section of the New York Times with her. She told her friend that she was looking for an apartment and she was going to tell Bob that she was leaving him. And of course, her friend was elated. I would have definitely advised her not to actually tell Bob, but to just, pack my shit in the night and leave when he was working. On Sunday, July 7th, 1985, things turned. Gail's employer, Francesca Beale, called Gail because she hadn't heard from her in a while. Unfortunately, she was calling for Bob and not Gail. She wanted to ask Bob for a referral to a doctor. Francesca said that Gail seemed quiet and sad that the call hadn't been for her. After the call, something sparked an argument that the downstairs neighbors heard. Don't know what it was, but they were arguing. They said that the argument was very loud and went on for a good bit until it very abruptly ended, and then there was silence. What do we think happened there? Well, later in the day, Bob left the apartment and went to New Jersey for a birthday party for his nephew. He told people that Gail left the apartment angry and that he was worried about her. So Bob called Gail's mother that night asking if she knew where Gail was because they'd had a fight and she stormed out. He said that she never came home. Bob then calls Denise, the friend that she was with the previous day, and asks if Gail is still with her. And Denise says, no, they left each other a day ago. Denise said she knew immediately that something had happened to Gail. And when Elaine found out that Gail was nowhere to be found, she said that she knew that her sister was dead at Bob's hands. If Gail was gone and possibly dead, then there was really only one suspect. On July 8th, the only suspect walked into the 19th precinct and reported his wife missing. Bob was interviewed at length, and he claimed that sometime in the morning they'd had an argument and Gail had left to go to Central Park. He said that she was dressed in summer clothing and looked like she was going to lay in the sun and had taken a lawn chair with her. And her friends said that she did do this a lot, actually. By the next weekend, Gail was still nowhere to be found, and her family began handing out missing persons posters in Central Park. Not one person said that they saw or recognized Gail. Okay. But after he reported his wife missing, Bob Bierenbaum didn't seem to want anything to do with the investigation. I guess he thought he had done enough, just showing up and saying, hey, my wife's missing. But the Bierenbaum family, like Bob's parents, didn't feel they'd done enough and started to insinuate that Gail was responsible for her own disappearance, claiming that she was a mentally unstable alcoholic and maybe she killed herself. They said this in front of Gail's family, who vehemently denied this. Gail had a therapist at the time she disappeared that confirmed that she was not suicidal or at risk at that time. Then the Bierenbaums floated the theory that Gail had disappeared in a drug deal gone wrong. I don't know, although there's no evidence that Gail took drugs really, like she wasn't a habitual drug user. She'd been known to do a couple of party drugs, but she certainly wasn't going to a drug deal in the park. They were trying to cast doubt on the fact that Bob had anything to do with her disappearance and trying to put the idea into investigators' minds that Gail had killed herself. Well, the police weren't buying the suicide theory because if Gail had killed herself in Central Park, they would have found her body because She wouldn't have left Central Park if she was dead. And they didn't find any bodies there at all. Bob didn't seem to care what was happening with the investigation or the fact that his wife was missing. In fact, he was partying in the Hamptons at some discos and dating women he met in the clubs. He and Gail had a share in a Hamptons house, and Bob went there practically every weekend after Gail disappeared. He started dressing like a disco douche and having an early midlife crisis. His behavior definitely wasn't that of a man concerned with his wife's disappearance. He was cold and dismissive. Bob's coworker, Karen, who was a hospital coworker, was set up on a date with him only a few weeks after Gail went missing. They went out to dinner and he drove back to his house. Karen asked what happened with Gail, and Bob claimed that she flew to California and got a waitressing job on the coast. He claimed that he hired a PI and that this guy found her alive and well and living in California. Sure guy, but she doesn't tell her family or anyone else where she's going or that she's all right. Who is buying it? Former NYC prosecutor Dan Bibb says that is a lie. Bob apparently did hire a private eye, but when Bibb spoke with him, this man claimed that there was never any evidence that Gail was in California or anywhere else alive, and he had never seen her. So Karen asked if the police had searched Bob's apartment, and Bob said that it was clean. But former NYPD detective Vincent Delsis says that is another untruth. So technically, the apartment was searched, but the scope of their search was limited to finding fingerprints on personal items that Gail may have come into contact with during normal daily activity. I think literally just to get her fingerprints. I don't think this was like a real search. Dalsis tried to get a search warrant with a broader scope, and that was objected to by Bob's attorney. And for some odd reason, it worked, and the search never happened. So Karen didn't believe him entirely, but she had sex with him anyway, probably because she was afraid she'd disappear to California and get a waitressing job if she didn't. Again, this man's wife has only been missing for a few weeks, and he is partying and banging randos without a care in the world. After a few years, the Manhattan DA's office decided to take another look at the case, and it went to Chief Investigator Andy Rosenzweig. Andy Rosenzweig knew that Bob was a pilot, so he began canvassing airports to see if he could find any records of flights on the day of Gail's disappearance. At the second airport they visited, they found a record of Bob having flown out on July 7th, the very day Gail disappeared. He flew for over an hour and a half and then returned to the airport. Rosenzweig went through the interview transcripts, and Bob denied having flown a plane that day. He said he didn't go anywhere else that day, just to the party. So we've got a problem because Bob told the police who interviewed him initially that Gail left out of anger after a fight. He waited and then left for a birthday party in New Jersey, and he explicitly denied that he flew a plane that day. So the timeline they were able to piece together was this. Sometime in the early afternoon on July 7th, Bob drove to the airport in New Jersey, flew for an hour and a half, and then went to his nephew's birthday party in the evening. So what happened in that hour and a half that he hadn't told detectives about? He claimed to have stayed home until 5:30 p.m. when he left for the nephew's birthday party. Immediately, detectives knew that he was lying and that he was in fact 80 miles out over the Atlantic Ocean, and this was most likely how he had disposed of Gail's body. Detectives believed that Bob killed Gail and put her in a duffel bag. Then he drove the bag to the airport, rented a plane, and flew over the Atlantic, dropping her body into it. The evidence was circumstantial, unfortunately, so the DA's office couldn't charge Bob with murder. In May of 1989, 3 years after Gail's case goes cold, a female torso washed up off of Staten Island. Because it came from the Atlantic, the DA thought that the torso could belong to Gail, and so the torso was compared to chest x-rays that Gail had taken. It was confirmed that the torso was that of Gail Katz based on those x-rays. Her family buried what remained in Mount Zion Cemetery, but there was no justice for Gail and no rest for her sister. Elaine was determined to make sure that Robert Bierenbaum didn't get to live out his days peacefully. She wanted everyone in New York to know that he was a murderer. So she sent newspaper clippings to clinics and doctors that Bob worked with. She left messages on his machine, letting any woman in his apartment know that they weren't safe. Good for her, good looking out. And she intended to make every day of his life miserable. She wanted everyone to know what he was. It appeared her efforts paid off when in 1989, Bob turned tail and ran off to Las Vegas like a little bitch. And Elaine believes that she ran him out of New York. And good for her. I would have done the exact same thing. Rather than actually do any work on himself emotionally or mentally, Bob decided to reinvent himself superficially. He started wearing fancy suits and living the life of a Las Vegas plastic surgeon. He still looks like a fucking creep, though. You can't polish a turd, I'm just saying. He befriended high profile doctors, and he didn't disclose anything about his past in New York, and no one really knew anything about him or his past. On December 31st, 1989, I keep getting the year screwed up here, sorry, 1989, chiropractor Stephanie Youngblood was introduced to Bob Bierenbaum at a New Year's Eve party. She thought he was very nice, tall, dark, and handsome. Sidebar. This is like a Ted Bundy situation for me, meaning many people think that he was attractive, and I'm like, what the actual fuck drug do you take to make you think that this man is attractive? Sidebar over. If you think Ted Bundy is attractive or this Bierenbaum asshole, please get your head examined. Thank you. Stephanie knew absolutely nothing about Bob's past or his disappeared wife. How could she? I mean, there wasn't Google. That's Google's true application, stalking potential love interests. He asked Stephanie on a date, and of course, he flew her over the Las Vegas Strip at night, which, yes, would be cool as hell. She said that the first year was tons of fun, and they went to social events, they went on ski trips, they went to like formal affairs, they were just a society couple. And Bob seemed new and improved, and he even got a sports car to match his Armani suits, proving that money can't buy class. And Bob joined a group called Charitable Doctors that flew down to Mexico and did surgeries for free. So really, he's presenting himself as, this fantastic person. But still, Stephanie finds it odd that Bob wouldn't tell her what had gone on in New York or why he'd left. Even stranger, Stephanie wanted him to have his palm read, and he really, really did not want to. The palm reader said that his energy was dark and that his eyes were the strangest things she'd ever seen. She said they were constantly shifting and moving, like he was hiding something, I guess. Finally, after seeing a luggage tag that said Gail Bierenbaum, Stephanie flat out asks Bob who she is. Bob took a long pause and he got emotional when telling her that he'd been married before. He claimed that they'd had a fight and that she took off for Central Park, never to be seen again. Of course, he claimed that police had thoroughly investigated him and that he had been cleared of any wrongdoing. Stephanie said that she believed him. And about a year and a half into dating, Stephanie opened a fortune cookie and found an engagement ring inside. She told Bob that they couldn't get married because he wanted kids and she didn't. I mean, she's just being honest. They want different things out of life, but that's when the trouble began. When Bob didn't get his way, his true colors started to show. He did the thing where you told him no, and now he's going to throw a fit like a little boy. So the couple stayed together and took a trip with several other doctors to Sedona. The landing of the plane was rough, and when she went to exit, Stephanie apparently bumped the door, like it's an accident. Immediately, Bob's demeanor changed, and he went into a rage, screaming at her and nearly striking her in front of the other passengers on the plane. Again, like if he'll do this in public, what would he do in private? On another trip by boat, Stephanie said she feared for her life. She asked the host for a glass of red wine, and when he opened it, it sprayed everywhere. She said like a bottle of champagne. It just like popped off. And Bob lost his shit. He screamed at her, and somehow it was her fault that a bottle of wine sprayed after being opened somewhere else or, by someone else. Definitely not her fault. Definitely strange things to freak out on someone over. Just like Gail had, Stephanie suggested that Bob seek professional help because very clearly he has some anger issues. He did, and after the session, the therapist told Stephanie that her life was potentially in danger, just like Dr. Stone had with Gail. So she built a strategy to leave Bob and did so without incident. And I just wish to everything that Gail had done the same thing before it was too late. But Bob was unscathed and he moved on over and over again. This tacky son of a bitch even took the same diamond and reset it multiple times for different women until he met Janet Cholet. Janet was a Las Vegas gynecologist and supposedly Bob's dream woman. In June of 1996, they were married. Soon after, Janet got a job in Minot, North Dakota, and Bob would reinvent himself again in a new city. Minot is a very rural town in Montana and seems like a great place, to go if you were hiding from something. Bob and Gail both worked at Trinity Hospital in their respective fields, and they moved into a modest condo. His neighbors again found him odd and off-putting, and his, style of dress went back to that of a New Yorker. He was well known in the community for making his own bagels, and really, besides being fucking weird, that was the only thing that stood out about him. On July 30th, 1998, an incident at the North Dakota State Fair turned Bob into a local hero, and people quickly forgot about his odd behaviors. When, one of those, like, I don't know if you're older like me, you maybe got your picture taken with a tiger cub or a leopard cub. I think it's frowned upon now, but there was like one of those attractions set up in a tent. There was also a 200-pound tiger. Yeah. And for some reason, the handler decided that he was going to put that tiger in a family photo with small children. The tiger attacked a little boy and gnawed on his head. The boy nearly lost his eye and ear, and he was taken to Trinity Hospital. They thought they were going to have to fly him further away, by medevac, but it turned out there was a plastic surgeon, Bob, at Trinity Hospital. But Dr. Bierenbaum actually reattached the boy's ear and eye, and many people, including the boy's father, believed that he saved his life. With his new local hero status, people in town tried to get to know him better, because he's a hero. They want to talk to him. And this included the owner of a local bagel shop. In passing, she asks if he's ever been married before, and his reaction was shock and surprise. Like, he was visibly upset, which is weird because why would someone get so upset about polite conversation if, they weren't a murdering son of a bitch? Well, Janet decided that she wanted to go to law school. So she moved to Grand Forks, North Dakota, which is about 200 miles from Minot. Bob moved with her, but continued seeing patients in Minot and was able to do so by flying back and forth. Bob and Janet had a daughter soon after, and they hired a nanny to help out. The nanny said that Bob was a great father to his little girl and seemed like a very nice man. So Bob was playing house and had a whole family and a whole new life. All of this got back to the Katz family and to New York detectives, and I guess it did not sit well. At this point, Elaine believed that Bob was never going to pay for what he did to Gail. Well, while Bob was busy building his new life in North Dakota, someone very important just couldn't let Gail's case go. Former chief investigator for the DA's office, Andy Rosenzweig, was heading toward retirement, and Gail's case was still haunting him. The DA's office had just created a cold case unit, and Rosenzweig decided to give that case to seasoned investigators Steve Sirocco and Dan Bibb. And he did this in the hopes that they could maybe make something stick. Rosenzweig brought the file to Bibb and Sirocco, and of course, they immediately noticed the fact that Bob had flown for nearly 2 hours on the day his wife disappeared. They also noticed that he didn't admit to that fact in any interrogation. And then they saw the letter from Dr. Stone and decided that they should call him just to get his opinion on Bob and, ask maybe if he's capable of killing his wife. Dr. Stone said, "Of course Bob killed Gail. He's a dangerous psychopath." And the investigators knew they were on the right track. They decided to reopen Gail's case, but of course her family had some hesitations. They didn't want the wound reopened for nothing. Investigators assured them that it wouldn't be for nothing, but they did need something from the Katz family. They needed to exhume the torso that the Katzes had put under Gail's headstone. The family gave permission in the summer of 1998 for Gail's body to be exhumed. At the time the torso was found, x-rays had been used to identify it as belonging to Gail, but because DNA technology had advanced, they wanted to test it against Gail's DNA. As it turns out, the torso that Gail's family had buried was not Gail. Her family was, of course, devastated. They thought they had some closure. Now all they had was an empty grave. Sirocco and Bibb decided to re-interview everyone that had been involved in the case, including a woman that Bob had dated shortly after Gail's disappearance. The woman recalled a phone call in the middle of the night from the police in which they informed Bob that they believed they may have found Gail alive at a bus stop. Bob responded, "Can I call you in the morning?" Like he just didn't give two fucks. Then turned to the woman and said, "I doubt it's Gail. Go back to bed." Does he know something they don't? They also went to Las Vegas to interview the women he dated there. They knocked on Stephanie Youngblood's door, and she was shocked when they asked to interview her about Bob. Again, he hadn't even told her about the investigation, only that his wife left him. In late November of 1998, investigators were sent to North Dakota to see if they could get a statement from Bob. They really wanted to rattle him because he obviously felt safe and believed at this point that he had gotten away with something. Bob reacted with shock and disbelief, like, "Who, me?" This time, the DA's office was able to gather enough evidence that they felt confident enough to charge Bob. 14 years after Gail's disappearance in September of 1999, Bob Bierenbaum is indicted by a grand jury for second-degree murder. The story broke, and everyone who'd met him in Las Vegas and North Dakota now had to come to terms with the fact that the upstanding doctor was potentially a murderer, including his current wife, who stood by his side. Bierenbaum returned to New York to stand trial for Gail's murder. There was no body and no physical evidence, so this was obviously going to be a difficult case to prove. On September 18th, 2000, the trial began with Judge Leslie Proctor Snyder presiding. Judge Snyder also realized that this would be a difficult case to prosecute because of the lack of physical evidence. Even though the prosecution had no physical evidence, they did have documented physical and emotional abuse from Bob. The choking incident was admitted into evidence because, remember, Gail actually filed a police report afterward, as well as the ominous letter from Dr. Stone to Gail. Unfortunately, the letter wasn't actually admitted to evidence because of doctor-patient confidentiality. Like, they didn't want that seen by the jury. Again, doctor-patient confidentiality. Despite the smoking gun not being seen by the jury, the evidence that existed really only pointed in one direction. Another critical part of the prosecution's case was the fact that Bob had indeed flown his plane on the afternoon that Gail disappeared. He told police that he was alone in their apartment and didn't leave until much later that afternoon, which was not true. Prosecutors were able to show jurors Bob's personal flight logs that show that the 7-7 flight, like the date marked 7-7 in the log, had been very poorly altered to look like 8-7. Like, it looked like something a child would do when trying to change a grade from an F to an A. Like, it was some shoddy work. The defense really only had one leg to stand on, and that was to cast doubt on the ability of a pilot to push a body out of a moving plane. Bob claimed that it was impossible for a pilot to fly the plane and push out a 110-pound body while the plane was traveling at 100 miles per hour. He said it defied the laws of physics because he's a physicist now, I guess. But Sirocco and Bibb decided to test that theory out, and they recreated the body dump. They took 110 pounds worth of sandbags in a body bag up in a plane over the ocean and very easily dumped it out of the pilot's door and the passenger door. The bag literally dropped straight down into the ocean. It looked like a scene from an action movie. They even filmed the recreation and showed it to the jury. It's very compelling, maybe even the most critical element of this case. It's pretty damning, really, because the defense claimed that this was just physically impossible, and here it is on film, like super, super easy to do. So the prosecution called 34 witnesses who testified to Bob's character and the fact that Gail was planning to leave him. Many of Bob's acquaintances, including a woman he began seeing only 3 weeks after Gail went missing, testified about the numerous different stories he had told them about Gail's disappearance. He reportedly told people that Gail was a drug addict and an alcoholic. She was depressed and suicidal at the time of her disappearance. And her friends and therapists, like I said, denied these statements. Although one of Gail's boyfriends did admit that they had used cocaine together several times, but who cares? That doesn't make her suicidal. Also, it was the 80s. Like, I thought pretty much everybody was using cocaine then. But the defense, of course, tried to tarnish Gail's reputation on cross-examination. Yeah, let's do that to somebody who can't defend themselves. They brought up mental health issues and possible infidelity, but the evidence didn't amount to anything. But the defense brought out a supposed eyewitness that threatened to overturn the prosecution's case, one Mr. Joel Davis. Davis was a retired textile manufacturer who told police early on the day of July 7th that he'd seen Gail in the H&H bagel shop at 3 p.m. on the afternoon of her disappearance in beach clothes. So that matches what she was described as, leaving the house wearing. If that were true, it would destroy the timeline presented by the prosecution because Davis claimed to have seen Gail when Bob was supposedly dumping her body. But Joel Davis described the woman he saw in the bagel shop as large and statuesque, full-figured with a large chest. Gail was very thin, like 110 pounds, and definitely not full-figured. She wore an A-cut bra. So yeah, Joel Davis did not see Gail, and there goes the one and only witness for the defense. In summation, the prosecution believed that Bob was the right man. There were really no other plausible suspects, and the fact that Gail's body still had never been found only gave further credence to the theory that he had dumped her body into the middle of the ocean. They believed that the movie North by Northwest, classic Alfred Hitchcock film, may have even given Bob the idea because the main character discusses body disposal with someone, and they say that the best way to do it is over water. And apparently Bob loved that movie. So the defense attempted to take apart the prosecution's case, obviously because of the lack of physical evidence and Gail's suicide attempt, but their arguments were pretty flimsy. They mainly just tried to throw doubt at everything with no proof supporting any of their assertions. 15 years after Gail's disappearance, the case finally goes to a jury. After just 5.5 hours of deliberation, they deliver the verdict. Robert Bierenbaum was found guilty of the charge of second-degree murder. Gail's family was in disbelief that justice was finally served for their sister and that the man responsible was going to prison. Bierenbaum was sentenced to 20 years to life in 2000. So a little update. Something happened, pretty recently. So we know Bierenbaum was convicted of killing Gail, but he never confessed. And we just have to assume that we know what happened. He offered no apologies to the Katz family when he was sentenced. He showed no remorse and took no accountability. He spent the first 10 years of his prison sentence trying to get his verdict overturned, with several appeals to no avail. On December 30th, 2020, after 20 years in prison, Bob was up for parole. The parole board denied him, but gave no reason publicly why they reached that decision. But 2020 was able to obtain a transcript of that hearing. In the transcript, Bob confessed to killing Gail. He said on the night Gail died, quote, "I wanted her to stop yelling at me, and I attacked her." He was asked how he attacked her, and he responded, "I strangled her." He then goes on to say, "I went flying. I opened the door and then took her body out of the airplane over the ocean." He said that he killed Gail because he was, quote, "immature and didn't understand how to deal well with his anger." Well, I feel like by definition, all of us have been immature at some time, but if you're mature enough to fly a plane and be a doctor, you're probably, you can go to a therapist. You can deal with that anger. The parole board wasn't buying it either, stating that he was a 29-year-old medical doctor at the time. So how the F is he immature? They said he was a danger to the community and should remain incarcerated. He remained unremorseful even while confessing. And really, I think he was just admitting to it because he thought that, that's what remorse was. He's such a fucking psychopath that he has no concept of remorse or regret. Literally everyone involved in the case was stunned when they found out that he had finally admitted to killing and disposing of Gail, and that he'd done it in the exact manner that they believed him to. Sirocco and Bibb believed their theory was right, of course, but to have it confirmed by Bob himself was stunning. So Gail's case is, like I said at the beginning, so tragic because it was preventable. Gail tried to get help from police with regard to her abuser, but nothing was done. Sadly, that was, and sometimes still is, the case. Her sister Elaine wants to make sure that other women have a haven to go to, and so she founded the Katz House to help victims of domestic violence. At the time Bob first abused Gail, Elaine says that there just weren't the services or the knowledge of domestic violence in place for Gail to get the help that she desperately needed. For Gail's family, this was pretty much all the closure that they could get short of finding her body. Elaine believes that the cat's house is Gail's final resting place and that her sister's spirit and energy remains there and encourages her every day, which I think is absolutely beautiful. Robert Bierenbaum's next parole hearing is set for November of 2022, so that one's coming up. If you or someone you know is suffering from domestic abuse, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Do what you have to do to get out. You can get out. I have gotten out. If you want to talk about it in a DM or an email, feel free to reach out to me, but you can do it. It's definitely not easy, but you can absolutely do it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as you could. And if you like what you heard, please feel free to listen to more on all platforms. I am now on Spreaker Prime and released on Mondays and Fridays. You can find me on social media on Instagram at Autumn's Oddcast, on Facebook at Autumn's Oddities, and on Patreon at Autumn's Oddities. If you join Patreon at any level, you get access to Patreon only episodes and you get early access. It's about 24 hours ahead of, when it's released to the public. If you have any stories you'd like to send to me, any case suggestions, you can do so at autumnsodditiespodcast@gmail.com. Make sure to follow wherever you listen to your podcast. If your app allows, give me a nice little review. Give me 5 stars. Say something nice. And I hope you keep listening. And remember, if it's creepy and weird, you'll find it here.